On December 14th, 2023, Naughty Dog announced that they would be canceling their multiplayer Last of Us game. I think The Last of Us Online is a perfect representation of everything wrong with multiplayer gaming right now. How did we get here? Naughty Dog had included a multiplayer mode with their previous 4 games, those games being Uncharted 2, Uncharted 3, The Last of Us, and Uncharted 4. So it was fair to expect a multiplayer mode would be in their next game, The Last of Us Part 2. Throughout early development, it seemed that this would be the case as they worked on a follow-up to the Factions mode from the first game. But at some point along the line, the mode started to expand into something much bigger. It was officially announced on The Last of Us Day 2019 that the multiplayer mode had grown into something larger than expected, and therefore it would not be available when The Last of Us Part 2 launched. At this time, it was still unclear what the scope of this multiplayer project would be. Was it going to be a multiplayer mode that would just be added later? Would it be a paid DLC expansion? Maybe even a full game? It seems even Naughty Dog themselves were not sure yet. The Last of Us Part 2 launched on June 19th, 2020, with the multiplayer game still in development. A lot of fans assumed that this multiplayer game would be launching sooner rather than later, considering it was originally intended as a side mode, and it had already been confirmed to be in development for at least 2 years. At the time, fans were expecting to play it within the next year or so, but the troubled development of The Last of Us Online was just getting started. As the months went on, we weren't hearing much from Naughty Dog. With every PlayStation State of Play, fans hoped they would get to see The Last of Us Online, but it never came. The yearly Last of Us Day celebration was seen as the next best chance for some news, but significant updates weren't coming from that either. The Last of Us Day 2020 gave us just a cryptic tweet, and The Last of Us Day 2021 had a lackluster update simply confirming that the game was still in development and that they were continuing to hire for the project. Finally, in 2022, we got a significant update at Summer Games Fest 2022. It was here that Druckmann officially confirmed this would be a standalone multiplayer game, and he made some bold claims to back it up. He said it will be just as big as Naughty Dog's genre-defining single-player games and will feature brand new characters. Although it would be a multiplayer game, they assured fans it would still feature the legendary storytelling that Naughty Dog is known for. We saw some concept art, and Druckmann ended his talk by letting us know that we would hear a lot more about this game in the next year. But then the next year came, and we got nothing. In January 2023, Druckmann did release some new concept art, but that was it. Radio silence other than that. It was clear something was not quite right, as the game had now been in some form of development for at least 4 years, and we had not seen even a single second of gameplay. Fans were worried, and in May 2023, reputable games journalist Jason Schreier confirmed our fears. Schreier reported that Sony had slowed development of the game, and Naughty Dog would be re-evaluating. In the same report, it said that Sony asked Bungie to evaluate all of their live service games in development and give their feedback. Bungie raised concerns over The Last of Us Online's ability to maintain players for a long period of time, and so with that, the project had been scaled back significantly. Naughty Dog was quick to put out a statement ensuring us the game was still in development but would just need some more time. Looking back now, I think this was basically a soft cancellation of the game, because after 7 more months of silence, Naughty Dog finally ripped off the band-aid and confirmed The Last of Us Online had been cancelled. They claimed they would be unable to support the game long-term without impacting what the studio is known for, single-player games. This was a really smart statement by Naughty Dog because it was a way to gain some support from the fans. It made it seem like a loyalty statement, reaffirming that they would never go away from their single-player games, and if canceling this multiplayer project was what it took, then they just had to do it. But I don't think this is really telling the whole truth. Sony is a billion-dollar company. If The Last of Us Online was looking like an incredible game that would be a smash hit, Sony would hire the extra staff necessary to keep it supported, while the core of Naughty Dog continued along with their single-player games. Sony wouldn't just let a great game be shelved for no reason. Regardless of what those reasons were, The Last of Us Online is dead. You may be wondering why I just told you this story. I told you this story because The Last of Us Online is a perfect example of everything wrong with multiplayer gaming today. It's time to talk about the dreaded live service. Live service is, at its core, a simple concept. The goal of a live service game is to keep players playing one game for an extended period of time, potentially even forever. I'll give you an example. Imagine a developer releases a typical multiplayer FPS game. If it's successful, that game would receive a sequel in a year or two, which makes the original game obsolete. But if that developer had released a live service multiplayer FPS game, they would just keep supporting that one for the next several years instead of pivoting to a sequel. In theory, live service should benefit both the developers and the consumers. If a developer makes a game that really hits, they can just continue supporting that one instead of trying to make a new game and risking fans not liking it. Meanwhile, it should be good for the players as well, because the games they buy will last them for years instead of a couple weeks or a couple months. But as is the case with most things in business, the results aren't quite as pure. Live service games, especially free-to-play live service games, are cluttered with microtransactions. I do understand why microtransactions have to exist, as this is how the developers can afford to continually update a game. But unfortunately, the microtransactions we know today are increasingly predatory. Nowadays, most live service games feel like they're trying harder to get our money than trying to make an actual enjoyable game. Live service has become an incredibly popular route for developers recently, as the potential profits of a success in this genre are extreme. Simply put, why charge players for a game one time when you can charge players for a game 50 times? It feels like every studio has been desperately trying to get their hands on the live service cash cow with varying levels of success. What this leads to is tons of live service games flooding the market that their studios are quick to drop at the slightest sign of a slowing return. As every developer desperately tries to make the next Fortnite, they've forgotten how to make a simple and fun multiplayer game or even a multiplayer mode. If the game isn't a billion-dollar money printer that can get sucked dry for 5 years, then it was a failure. We see so many live service games released that immediately fall flat on their faces, yet developers keep making them. Why is that? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. One major success in this genre can make up for all the other failures. This is why Sony's strategy with live service is not all that surprising. It's been reported that at one point Sony has had as many as 12 live service games in development recently. This absurd number of games is essentially trying to fail-proof the live service model, because if literally just one of these 12 games is a big success, it can pay off the development costs of all the other 11. But through all of this live service mania, we've lost sight of what made multiplayer games great in the first place. Now, this may seem a bit random, but while writing this, I was reminded of a video in which Michael Cera discusses his filmography, and in that video he made an interesting point about the film industry that I feel relates to this discussion.
A $10 million movie or something, which used to be kind of normal to get made, and now I don't think they're being made anymore. I think you either make now like a very small movie that we can go make like with this crew, or a giant movie. So it's a little weird. It's changed.
What Cera is describing here perfectly represents the multiplayer gaming space as well. It feels like the only multiplayer games that get released today are either small indie titles or AAA live service games. We've totally lost that middle ground, similar to the film industry. What happened to playing games on the couch with your friends? What happened to having a simple multiplayer mode like we had often in the 360 PS3 era? We've reached a point where a multiplayer game can seemingly no longer exist without a roadmap detailing years worth of updates. Ironically, Naughty Dog's past multiplayer modes are a perfect example of this. The original Factions was never really a smash hit. It never broke records, it probably didn't make Sony a ton of money, but you know what it did do? It garnered a dedicated community that loved it, and it kept them coming back. The same can be said for Uncharted's multiplayer. I personally remember playing Uncharted 4's multiplayer for like 10 or 20 hours back in the day. That's not an outstanding amount of time, but it's better than nothing, right? Uncharted 4 is a single player game with a definitive ending. If it hadn't been for that multiplayer mode, I would have finished the story and then probably never played it again. But that multiplayer mode kept me engaged for a few more hours. That has to count for something. But hey, Uncharted 4's multiplayer didn't get me to buy battle passes for 5 years, so I guess it was a failure. The AAA live service model is a bubble waiting to burst. At a certain point, I have to imagine these companies will grow tired of throwing money away on these games that really don't have a chance to compete in such a competitive market. Not to mention, players are growing increasingly tired of this business model in general. There's nothing wrong with a fairly priced multiplayer game keeping players around for 20 to 30 hours before they decide to move on. Not every game needs to be a live service platform that keeps us engaged for the next 10 years. Not every multiplayer game can be Fortnite. That's so unrealistic to expect. If anything, I hope The Last of Us Online can be used as a lesson. Instead of trying to make the best multiplayer Last of Us game they could make, Naughty Dog spent years trying to figure out how they could make it live service. Now, I will say that it's probably more so Sony's fault, but the point still stands. Millions of dollars and tons of bad press later, they're right back where they started. What could have been a simple and fun multiplayer mode for The Last of Us Part 2 turned into a years-long circus for Naughty Dog. I truly hope other developers and other studios take some notes, before multiplayer gaming reaches a breaking point of no return.